What are you doing here tonight? What's your background? You know.
My name is Patrick Heintz. I'm a retired corrections officer. I spent the last 15 years of my career as a licensed substance abuse counselor at the Hampden County Sheriff's Department up in Western Massachusetts, and I am here speaking for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is an organization of former and current law enforcement personnel and supporters. It's an international organization, over 200,000 people, and we're advocating for a change in the drug policy, which is a failure on its own terms. We are not pro-drug by any means, but we think a rational public health model, drug policy will be more effective at keeping people from using drugs, abusing drugs, being damaged by drugs, and education is much more effective in substance abuse reduction than punishment and incarceration. But the crime associated with prohibition puts everybody in the community at risk, puts officers and law enforcement personnel at horrible risk, just like the prohibition of the 1920s enriched and empowered the gangsters of that era, and they bought guns and drive-bys, and by taking responsibility for the market, the demand for alcohol, regulating it, taxing it, by taking that responsibility, we put them out of business. Not that criminals won't look for some criminal activity to do, but they won't be funded by drug money anymore, which worldwide, it's estimated, goes to criminal enterprise to the tune of $355 billion every year to the cartels. Drug money, because we refuse to manage that market in our civilization, in our society.
So what made you choose this path that you're taking right now? Was it something that happened in your life?
Well,
on the job?
Well, after 20 years in corrections and being a human service worker, licensed substance abuse counselor in corrections, working with a corrections population, I got to see the futility of the system, the revolving door, intergenerational nature of this war on drugs. And we had 3 generations of families in our facility at the same time. We had Grandpa, Daddy, and Sonny Boy all doing time because it became the family business. And the recidivism was frustrating. They just keep on coming back because they aren't given an option. So if there's job readiness, training, education, GED, and people have a choice, but you can't take somebody's license away so they can't drive a car because they got caught with, 6 joints, and now they can't get to work. And so yeah, I was working in corrections for 20 years. It didn't serve the population. It didn't serve the community. It didn't make things better, and in fact, putting nonviolent drug offenders in with truly dangerous criminal people is counterproductive. Then you normalize a criminal, antisocial mentality in these people who otherwise didn't have it before they got to jail. That's not a good idea.
No, it's not. This is basically, a self-perpetuating cycle that just, keeps feeding into itself. Do you see any way that we can, stop that cycle, cut it off somewhere?
Well, it's like the commercial on TV, Stop the Insanity. Once people realize that it's just such a waste of blood and treasure to no good purpose, that nothing good comes of it. I think once you raise the consciousness of the disaster and the destructiveness of it, I think once you raise the consciousness and people can make up their own minds about, and the inhumanity of it, You know, this movie, that scene where the little baby's saying, "Please don't take my mommy." It's like there's real human toll. Every person we arrest or incarcerate for drugs, they have relatives, and it affects the whole family system. You know, the trauma of the criminal justice system. It's not necessary. 25% of the prison population is simple possession. It's not necessary.
So what are your feelings on the mandatory minimum sentencing on drug possession?
In my opinion, it's one of the biggest, most unmitigated tragedies of the criminal justice system. First of all, it takes judgment away from judges. Judges can't, it's just a knee-jerk, lock them up, throw away the key kind of a solution to a problem that's a mental health issue. So the mandatory minimums are a disaster, and what they result in is the overcrowding of jails, and then because you can't release a mandatory minimum early, so you have a violent offender who has to be released early because he doesn't have a mandatory minimum. And this thing about police departments pumping up their stats through easy drug arrests, just go round people up. Well, we had an event here and we arrested 200 people, versus the officer who goes out and he does an investigation and he arrests a rapist or he arrests a murderer, and it's once a month. Well, when you arrest the rapist, the rapes stop. When you arrest the murderer, the murders stop. When you arrest this kid selling drugs on the street, the little kid behind him, the peewee as they call them, the little kids, he sees it as a job opportunity. Nothing stops, nothing changes. And the DEA's own estimates is that their interdiction, their ability to intercept drugs to the United States is 5%. If they're really trying to puff themselves up, they'll say they interdict 10% of the drugs that come to the United States. Well, if I were Budweiser and 10% of my bottles broke, I'd just call that spillage. It's like the cost of doing business. It doesn't put me out of business. It's spillage. And there's always somebody to take the place of the person who's getting arrested. So, you know, and they spend 6 months investigating this, and they arrest 6 people, and they get this big pile of money. It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the $35 billion a year in drug profits.
Why do you think they have the mandatory minimum set up? Why do you think the system seems to be this self-perpetuating and it just feeds into itself?
The mandatory minimum system basically came into effect, I believe, around the 1980s. And the thinking was, well, if we arrest all of the users and get them off the streets, the drug dealers will have nobody to sell to, and then the drug dealers will go away. But, you know, this stuff about being tough on crime and that drug abuse is this public enemy #1. It's just not true. Drug violence, you know, drug dealing violence may be a public enemy, and I don't know what the number is, but the substance abuser doesn't do a drive-by shooting. It's the drug gang member trying to protect his turf that does the drive-by shooting. So if we tax and regulate the drug market, if we take responsibility for managing the market that's always been with us, and we put the violent drug dealing factions out of the equation, it just increases public safety. So.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you want to basically legalize, you know, drugs, and I know to some people at home that might sound a little outrageous. So, any comments about that?
Well, tobacco, which kills 400,000 people a year, is legal and taxed and regulated. And as a result of that, we're able to tax it and take some of that money and have public education services. And as a result of that, since the Surgeon General's warning, We've reduced tobacco consumption from 75% down to 17% just through education, because it's horribly dangerous. We don't want anybody smoking tobacco, but if they do, we want them to have good, accurate information. We also want them to have resources to help them quit if they want. But through the taxation, we have resources to educate the kids coming up that it's not cool and it's not sophisticated and it's foolish, and you know. And so that's how we've reduced consumption of the most dangerous drug in America, 400,000 deaths a year. I think heroin and cocaine, it's estimated there's around 37,000. I'm not even sure. It might be 37. I'm not sure about that, but it's a very low figure compared to the 400,000. So if we regulate all the drugs, then we have control. We take control away from the criminal factions. And the other thing is, heroin, for instance, from point of purchase to sales, has a markup of 60%, right? So a heroin addict will need $100 a day. So he'll have to rob your house or rob a store to get the $100 a day. We could sell it to him in a government medically supervised injection site for registered heroin addicts, and they could buy it for $10 a day and we could make a profit. When they're there, we can give them education services, make sure they're using clean needles so that they don't get infected and spread disease to their sexual partners and so forth, increase public health. So many things we could do if we taxed it and regulated it. We could reduce consumption. We could reduce new users coming up through education. And it's not cool. And geez, you're an addict and you have to go to the center because you're not well. Not because you're cool, because you're not well. And the kids say, oh, I don't want to be not well. So I don't want to wind up going to the center. But the heroin addict wouldn't have to rob. How he could collect cans to get $10 a day. So I don't know.
Now, during this film, I seen an inmate on there talking about how when he went to prison, he got skills, job skills, and which made him more confident in himself, and he doesn't even really want to lead that lifestyle when he gets out. Now, how can we implement some sort of program on the outside without having to send these people to prison to get those job skills that they need to where they can actually get away from that lifestyle?
Well, there is examples all across the place, these isolated examples where there's drug courts, there's alternative sentencing where people, instead of sentenced to prison, they're sentenced to treatment. And in treatment, there's education. They have to get their GED. They have to do job readiness. You know, there's an orientation period. They have to work around until they get sober around the house and so forth, and then they have to work. And there's wonderful models. I came from a really progressive facility, the Hampden County Sheriff's Department in Western Massachusetts, and our sheriff knew that in order for people who were getting out of his jail, so he knew it was county jail, they were getting out in 3 years or less. He knew that they were going to be his neighbors sooner or later, and he knew that it was in the community's best interest and his own best interest if these new neighbors of his, when they got out, were in better shape than when they went in. So he had a human service background. He started all these treatment programs, and people could earn their way from maximum security down to lesser restrictive levels of incarceration. And they could even eventually wind up in community-based corrections facilities where they'd have job readiness, get their GED. We had a job readiness supervisor who would coordinate with local employers in the area and advocate for them hiring our clients, the inmates, and tell them that, you know, if you hire an inmate, you get a tax break for it. They're going to show up because they're in the facility, and, you know, we know where they are, or they're on an electronic monitoring bracelet, and we know if they go to work. And so they're going to be more dependable for you. And so people would get jobs, and they were good jobs. Many of them were above minimum wage. And so they got used to going to work and getting a job. And so it wasn't this act of desperation, I have no other choice. So there's lots of models out there for solutions. But throwing people away isn't the solution.
Well, one last comment. I want to take it off on a more positive note. Now, do you have any words of wisdom for those who are out there, maybe sitting in prison or at home, watching this, full of despair, is stuck in that sort of lifestyle, thinking that they can't get out? Is there anything?
Well, as a substance abuse counselor, the obvious things are that change is inevitable. How people wind up in the situations they wind up in are often and usually not their fault. Like the guy, his father was killed when he was 6 and the mother started using drugs. So how a person winds up where they are may not be their fault. If they stay there, that's their responsibility. So they have to make an effort. They have to, there's self-help groups, AA, this kind of stuff where you can network and find other resources. But they're in between a rock and a hard place. There's so few treatment resources, compared to the $70 billion a year that's spent on drug war persecution. Where's the money for treatment on demand?
What are your opinions on gun control as a police officer?
Well, I'm not allowed to have opinions.
Oh, come on, man. Yeah, you are.
I'm not allowed to have opinions. If you were ordered to go into people's houses and confiscate, would you do it? I'm not allowed to order to have opinions. What if they did?
There you are, man.
We're attached to the Army, but we're more of a reserve component.
Nice. So what are you guys doing down here today?
We're down here as a presence, and we're...
As a presence? What do you mean by as a presence? That sounds intimidating to me.
No, it's not intimidating. We're just here to let people know that the Army is part of what we do.
Oh, we're with you, man.
Yeah, good deal.
Making them
Are you a veteran?
No.
Oh, okay.
I just play one on TV. Actually, I am a veteran on the war on drugs.
Okay, good.
Edit that out.